After the next crypto bull run, my hope is to buy a decent property with mostly cash. But after watching some YouTube videos, I had some questions pop up in my mind. Is this the wisest financial decision? Instead of buying a house with cash, would it actually make more sense to take out a mortgage and use that money to invest instead? Instead of putting all the money into a house, which I would it make more sense to lump sum invest into the stock market over 30 years? Would taking out a mortgage actually be a better way to push me towards financial independence instead of paying off my house? Which is a really interesting question. After doing some analysis, this investment decision could actually cost you millions of dollars. We'll explore this question in this video, and we'll do that by using a calculator, which I made, and you can download free in the description as well to see what you should do, what might be a better investment option for you. As usual though, this is not financial advice. This is literally just a spreadsheet. I am not a financial advisor.
Knowledge.
So let's go over the spreadsheet a little, then we'll kind of actually hop into the numbers. So it's organized by two rows, row 4 and row 5. Row 4 is associated with these two rows here, which is really associated with the 30-year mortgage. Row 5 is associated with a 15-year mortgage, and you can see it's down here for these rows as well. Now you can edit these. You can edit all the yellow columns if you just want to do different calculations for yourself. I'll leave that up to you. But let's go over a scenario. Let's say after the next 2 years, this next crypto bull one, whatever, I have about $300,000 to buy a house. Let's say, if not fully, I'm really close. So I can have $300,000 I could put in a house, or would it make more sense to use this $300,000 and instead lump sum invest into something else like the stock market? So that's the question we need to explore. So let's do our first house amount. Let's do $300,000. That's what we're going to shoot for. And a typical down payment right now in Michigan, just according to a quick Google search, is about 13%. But let's just do a 20% down payment just to get some round numbers and make it easier. So 20% of $300,000 is $60,000. We're going to put the same numbers down here, guys, just so you can compare the 30-year and 15-year mortgage if you want. So for a 15-year mortgage right now, just to estimate, it could be 6.816%. So let's put that into our calculator, 6.8. And then let's see a 30-year mortgage, which it might be 7.8, which is quite high right now. So let's put it in. So now you can see your monthly payment for a 30-year mortgage. You can see your monthly payment for a 15-year mortgage. And I just put the difference there for you guys just to see. But the interesting thing is you can see your total paid from all your payments and the interest paid. So with the 30-year mortgage, you're actually paying more in interest than the actual house amount, which is not true for the 15-year mortgage. So just something to keep in mind. But that's not the main thing we're going to be analyzing. The main thing is we're going to see, would it be wiser? So if we had a house amount of $300,000, a down payment, that leaves us with $240,000. And the question is, do we use this $240,000, dump into the house and have no mortgages? Or do we use this $240,000 to lump sum invest and use that money to invest and have a mortgage? And this is the main question. So let's assume our interest rate. Let's just go with a standard typical stock market return right now, which is 10% on average per year. This is a non-inflation adjusted return. It's going to give us some interesting results. So if we had a 10% stock market return, we have two options right now. If we had $240,000 from the house amount minus the down payment, would it be better to put that into the stock market, or would it be better to put that into the house, which is why this lump sum is zero, because we're not putting anything in the stock market, but instead we're going to use our monthly contributions, which you can see for the 30-year mortgage, our monthly payment for our mortgage would be $1,727. So instead of using that mortgage amount, since we paid off the house, let's put that into the stock market instead and see these differences. This is the question. So this is assuming a 10% rate of return. So if instead of a mortgage, we contributed to the stock market, we can see we would have had $621,000 over our 30 years. We would have made $3,283,000, and we would have had almost $4 million in the end. But if instead we use this $240,000 instead of into the house and put it into the stock market, we would have accrued so much interest over our 30 years because our lump sum investment would have been so large. Instead of close to $4 million, we would have had over and closer to $5 million, and we would have had an $855,000 difference by lump sum investing into the stock market. And then you can see I have a decision, which is get a mortgage, lump sum invest. This is according to the math, and we'll go over other scenarios later in the video. And you can see if you were only debating a 15-year mortgage, this scenario is the same. Your monthly contribution would have been this mortgage amount right here, so a little over $2,000, or you could lump sum invest $240,000. Now, while you still made a great amount with interest with your monthly contributions, if instead you took out a mortgage and put down your $240,000 in the stock market, you would have had over $1 million, and this is close to a $200,000 difference. Now let's compare a different scenario. This is with a 10% return. What happens if we do an inflation-adjusted stock market return, which is typically 7%? How does that change? If we're considering a 30-year mortgage, we can see things change differently. So with our monthly contributions, we would have had $2 million in interest with our monthly contributions, still $621,000 total. But if we lump sum invested, we actually would have had a smaller amount because our interest rate is smaller now than our loan rate. It'd only be $159,000 difference. So according to the math, right, the decision is don't get a mortgage, pay your house in cash because your interest rate is now lower than your loan rate. But the 15-year mortgage is different because we do get a loan rate that's lower than our interest rate. Typically, even inflation adjusted, we're going to have more money if we get a mortgage. But you can see the difference is negligible. It's only $8,000 in our calculator, which is the 15-year projection. So the question for you is, is this $8,000 really worth it to get a mortgage? For me, personally not. So for me, the real question is, how large is your loan? How high of a percentage is your loan? Because let's say we're a couple years ago, right? What happens if I had a 2 to 3% mortgage, which was pretty common, 5 years ago? What would have happened? What happened if I had a 2% mortgage on a 30-year loan? How would that change everything? Even with an inflation-adjusted return of 7%, we can see my decision should be get a mortgage and lump sum invest. And why is that? Because instead of putting $240,000 into the house, instead I put it in the stock market, I would have over $1 million in interest. I would have made $1,707,000. And this would be an $865,000 difference versus instead if I put my monthly payment towards the stock market instead of lump sum investing. And this is the main question. If your loan rate is so low, if you still have like a 2-3% mortgage, and we know you can get an inflation adjusted rate of 7% in the stock market, we can make a lot of money just putting that into the stock market instead of paying off our mortgage. Now, I know not everyone's going to have a 2 to 3% loan rate, but this is kind of the math behind it. And we can see this is with a $300,000 example, which is reasonable for Michigan. But maybe you're somewhere else and you're like, man, $300,000 is nothing. I need like a $600,000 house, right? Then we can see the difference can become millions. This could be $1 million, $2 million, $3 million decision you guys can make if you had that much cash on hand, which kudos to you if you really do. I don't expect that for most people though. So if you have a lower loan rate, if you have a 2-3% mortgage, typically, according to the math, the correct decision is get a mortgage and then lump sum invest that money instead. Now let's do a different example. What happens if the market actually has subpar returns? Some are like, this is the AI bubble, Nvidia's pumping like crazy, we have all these stocks pumping like crazy, just carrying the S&P 500, carrying QQQ, and it's only a handful of stocks. What if this is another big bubble and we get subpar returns over the next 15, 30 years? And that's the thing you can calculate for yourself. If you're like, man, I'm only expecting, we typically have a 7% inflation adjusted rate. What if we had like a 4%, which would be really sad, right? That'd be very depressing, but it is a possibility in our lifetime. What would happen if we got a 4% interest rate and we still had a low loan rate of like 2, 3%, whatever? You can see the correct mathematical decision would be to get a mortgage and lump sum invest. But the question is over 30 years, is this difference amount, $179,000, really worth it to have a mortgage if you got subpar results in the stock market? Is it worth it to make monthly payments over 30 years just to have an extra $179,000? That's a question you got to ask for yourself instead of being debt-free and then not worrying about your house except for taxes and you still got to pay those, right? But on the other hand, what if the stock market keeps pumping? What if we've been getting like 15, 20% returns per year for the next 15 years, 30 years, right? That'd be absolutely insane. Let's just do something more moderate. Let's say like 13%. We can see with the $300,000, $240,000 lump sum, this is a huge difference. If we put $240,000 and we had a ridiculous return of like 13% over 30 years, which I don't expect, this is just an example, you see the difference would be $7 million in your 30-year mortgage. In the 15-year mortgage, it'd only be not even $1 million due to compounding interest not taking full effect, right? So these are questions you got to ask for yourself. But let's go over some considerations. If you guys use this calculator and you're like, the math makes sense, but what do I really do? So I kind of kept a case for paying off a house versus keeping a mortgage. Question you should ask yourself is, would I rather have a mortgage or less stress? In my opinion, no mortgage means less stress. So is that extra money you might make from getting a mortgage worth it versus just paying off your house entirely, buying it with cash if that's a possibility? Next, your housing is secure, assuming you can still pay taxes. That's the nice thing about having a house paid off. You just got taxes, utilities, repairs, and you're good. You don't got to worry about anything else. And that can really be a big psychological factor for you that you may to consider. Number 3 is going to take knowing yourself a little. What psychologically feels better for you? Knowing you're mortgage-free, debt-free hopefully, or knowing you more potentially have better gains in the future? Does that extra $500,000, $1 million, whatever, some examples are $120,000, does that really make you feel better than knowing you are debt-free, knowing you'll have more money into retirement or whatever you decide to use it for? Those are questions you'll have to ask yourself. And question number 4. And then point number 4, in my opinion, you're more likely to buy a reasonable house for your budget rather than stretching yourself thin. How many people do you know that buy houses way out of their budget due to them affording a monthly payment if they got like a 2% rate? Probably not a 7% rate, but I'm sure you know many people who are stretched very thin because their monthly payment was so low. So they're like, let me just get this $200,000 extra on this house, right? If you were paying off a house, more likely you're going to be reasonable with it, with what you can actually afford, which I think is a benefit because you're going to be more realistic into your scenario and not stretch yourself thin. So these are considerations for paying off your house, buying a house with cash instead of getting a mortgage and investing. And then for the last point, point number 5, which I realize we should actually go over in this video, is can you stick to saving and investing, or you're more likely to spend more money if you're not paying off debt? So the question is, if you don't have a mortgage and now you're supposed to use this $1,727 instead of paying off a mortgage, you're going to monthly invest into the stock market. Can you actually do that? Or since you have an extra almost $2,000 per month, are you just going to spend that frivolously? So that's the only question you can answer. If the only thing keeping you going is, I want this debt gone, and then I'll save and invest, but you know you're not actually going to stick to that and you're just going to spend it on other things, this plan is not going to work, right? This is assuming you're using that monthly payment into investing and stick to that monthly payment. If you don't stick to that monthly payment and instead use this monthly contributions for something else, extra birthday parties, extra travels, whatever, which, I mean, is good. You should enjoy your life, but it's not going to make the difference you think it's going to do, right? So that's the consideration. Can you stick to saving and investing when you have no debt, no mortgage? Can you actually stick to the plan? And that's only something you can answer. I can't answer that for you. So these are considerations for paying off a house. And then the main consideration for keeping a mortgage, in my opinion, is how low is your interest rate, right? Are you going to be doing this when you have a 7.8 loan rate? I mean, probably not, even if you got 10%. Yeah, on paper it's worth it, but this is not an inflation adjusted rate of return, right? This is with inflation, $855,000, so it's not going to be worth that much in 30 years. So the question is this really worth it with such high loan rates right now? But if you had a 2% rate, that really might be worth it. That's an extra almost $3 million inflation adjusted, which is really good. So these are the only questions you can answer. Were you lucky? Did you get a nice loan rate? Comment down below, because I'm definitely not going to get it, which is why I'm looking at paying a house with cash if possible and paying it off ASAP. Now, if you guys do want to use the spreadsheet, I'm going to tell you once because no one listens. I don't get it. You click file and then you click make a copy. Don't request this from me. I'm going to start posting you guys' emails on the community tab or something that keep requesting me to share this. You click file and then make a copy for yourself. Then you can edit it. Do not request this from me. Thank you. So does it make more sense to take out a mortgage or invest? Only you can answer that. Only you can make your own decisions, your psychological decisions where the math makes sense. According to the math, it depends on your loan rate, but you have to take in more factors into that. Personally, for myself, regardless, I feel just paying a house with cash, having no mortgage, being debt-free is more psychologically satisfying than even if I could make a couple extra million due to having a low loan rate, which is not possible for me right now anyways. Now, you may have noticed in the video I did put a 10% interest rate, but I'm going to show you how you can beat the stock market using this 2 simple ETF portfolio right here. Peace.